On today's episode of the Launchpad podcast, we are talking a little bit more general thoughts about the draft, Tyty Washington, John Wall's recent buyout, Eric Gordon or other potential small forward options, and more. So don't go anywhere. We have a great show for y'all today on the Launchpad podcast.
Houston, Roger, we copy and we're standing by for your TE.
They throw it up. Oh, there goes Jalen Green. Humans can't fly. Rebound picked up by Green, who's back in. Plays it ahead of more. Back to Green. Oh, and in time for Thanksgiving. But there's plenty of yams to go around for everyone.
Welcome in to the episode of the Launchpad podcast presented by Clutch State Control Room. As always, I am your host, Don Knock. I'm joined by my fellow host, Paulo Alves. You can find me on Twitter at Don Knock. You can find the pod at Clutch City CR. If you go into the description there, you can find the link tree that has the YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify links. I want to thank everyone again for leaving YouTube comments. Y'all have done a really good job about that. We've got some good feedback in there. We've got some good discussion going in there. So if you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment. We very much appreciate those. Paolo, go ahead and tell the people where they can find your stuff.
You can find me on Twitter at Paulo Alves NBA. That's PAULOALVES NBA. Everything I do from podcasts like this one to the live shows on Twitter Spaces will find itself linked on there.
Perfect. And we are joined today for the first time after the draft by USA Today's Rockets Wire editor, Ben DuBose. Ben, how are you doing? I'm glad that you have you've humored us and joined in our shenanigans here. We'll get into that a little bit. I'm sure everyone is wondering why we are, looking so fashionable right now with our great sunglasses. Ben, tell the people where they can find your stuff, including your podcast, The Logger Line, and we'll go from there.
Yep, only the fashionable wear sunglasses at night. So since we're taping this at night, that's when you got to do it.
Shout out to Brad.
But yeah, Ben DuBose on Twitter, the Rockets Wire on Twitter, rocketswire.usatoday.com. And yeah, just search for the Logger Line and you can find it Apple, Google, Spotify, all your major podcast distributors.
Perfect. And you had friend of the show, Mike Scotto, on the most recent episode, and he talked a little bit about John Wall with you. He talked a bit about John Wall when he was on our space a few weeks ago. So that's definitely something we're going to get into today. But to start out with, Paulo, go ahead and tell the people why we are all wearing our fancy sunglasses.
Right. I guess it's not a joke anymore. I mean, if
as serious as it gets.
Yeah. When
Twitter
the people
serious.
Exactly. When the people make it official, if we can get it to stick. So people have made, we were looking for nicknames for Jabari Smith, right? Because we did a really poor job last year getting one for Jalen Green. Like, it took a long time.
I was in the 0G camp, and
he was going to change his number.
Unfortunately,
Right.
Yes, he will change his number, and 0G will no longer be applicable. But I thought that one was, it was decent.
By the way, the number switch still the big scoop from Don Knox. So let's give credit to the original source on that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And so I think Frank on Twitter from the Chop Shop put a poll up, and one of the options was Agent Smith, the guy from The Matrix. And well, we ran with it, and now we've been putting Agent Smith's like sunglasses on everybody's profile pic, everybody that wants to do it, and so it's a running joke now, and that's why we're all in sunglasses today. It's to celebrate Jabari Smith's new nickname, or should I say Agent Smith's new nickname.
Perfect. So Ben was not able to join us last time in our post draft pod because we record on Saturday like heathens. So understandable that he was not able to, stop by. But Ben, I'm going to give it to you a little bit. You wanted to talk about the pick, talk about kind of what led up to the pick and some of the fallout or, contention around people that are switching sides from, Paolo to Jabari and things of that nature.
Yeah. Well, for starters, I'm taking my shades off because, dude, it's night. Come on. I'm not doing the entire pod like this.
I have dedication to the bit. I will remain in sunglasses, but it's okay if you take them off. We appreciate you doing it for the introduction.
But the reason I wanted to address it, I think you guys have gotten an unfair rap. The Rockets picking at 3 in a draft where the top 3 were considered to be basically in their own tier, of course you are going to focus on the strengths of the guy that everyone thinks is going to be available at that pick. For Rockets Wire, I've been doing the aggregate mock drafts really since the lottery, so since mid-May. No one in the 5+ weeks that I did it had Jabari Smith at number 3. I would say 90% plus was Paolo. There were a few Chet Holmgrens from people who thought that Paolo might sneak up to OKC at 2. Nobody had Paolo at 1. He didn't even work out for them. It was a shock. So Paolo was 90% plus likely, maybe 10% Chet. Jabari, at least in the mock drafts, was 0. So, of course, Rockets fans are going to focus on the strengths of the guys, and in this case, really the guy, Paolo, that everyone connected to the draft says is going, in all likelihood, to be there. That is human nature. You're not going to do a serious comparison of the 3 when your team is not the one making the choice. A lot of people like to oh, well, these pros to Jabari, why didn't you talk about this throughout the process? Because the Rockets weren't picking at 1. If it was an Orlando Magic fan group, then yes, Magic fans probably shouldn't shift dramatically from Paolo to, or Jabari to Paolo, I should say, because the whole narrative on Magic Twitter for 6 weeks is about them having the choice. With the Rockets, of course, fans are going to focus naturally on who they think is going to be there. And of course, there is a viable case for Paolo. I understand why the Magic took him at 1. When I talked to some people around the Rockets and the league, the consensus response that I got was that Jabari is the safer pick. You should probably sleep better at night with him because with Jabari, between the elite shooting, the defense, the versatility, you know that he's not going to miss, or I guess you can't know, but you 99% know he's not going to bust. It's really hard to envision that scenario. But there are at least enough questions right now with his playmaking, his passing, his shot creation, things that at least to this point he hasn't shown in huge doses. Now, I did notice the Stanford KP numbers about the numbers that Jabari put up when Walker Kessler was not on the floor at Auburn, which really raised my eyebrow a little bit. Maybe he is going to be better with the floor spaced at creating on his way to the bucket. We'll have to wait and see. But even if you take the questions seriously in regards to his playmaking, his shot creation, et cetera, and clearly Paolo has an edge there, look, there's value in Jabari's floor. Whereas with Paolo, you hope that playmaking, that passing is going to fully translate. But if it doesn't, and the fact that he doesn't have nearly the length, the defensive versatility, there are scenarios where maybe he's just a solid starter at best. So it just sort of goes both ways. And the case for Paolo, now the upside with those skills is that if it all hits, he could be the type of alpha engine, like a top 5, top 10 type player that as of now, I don't know if you can say that you could reasonably have the same expectation with Jabari. Not to say he can't get there eventually, but just based on what we know to this point, I think it's safer to say Jabari has a higher floor and Paolo has a bit more upside if it all checks out. Now, whether it all checks out, that's probably not going to happen. But the reality is, if you're looking for 5-10% upside cases, then yeah, you can squint hard enough and see Paolo being a potential star. And that's what captivated you guys and Rockets fans for the past month. And that's completely understandable if you think that he's going to be your guy. But in this case, it doesn't mean that the other guys don't have their own strengths. It's just we didn't talk about them because nobody thought Jabari would be on the board. So it was pretty much pointless. Other than in the context of, there were some discussions about trading up. But look, I mean, trading up means giving up an asset, like a future first or more than that. Typically, if you look back at the Luka and Trae Young trade, Tatum and Fultz that year, when we're talking about literally just a 1-for-1, do you want Paolo or you want Jabari? Nobody thought that the Rockets would have a choice at Jabari, so that's why we weren't talking about it. So I understand why Orlando did what they did. If you think upside, you can see a scenario where Paolo can be, truly like the number 1 on a contender. Is it likely? No. But the path is there, and especially for a small market team like Orlando that doesn't have a Jalen Green, then I can see the appeal. And I will say from the Rockets standpoint, one reason why I'm much more comfortable with Jabari is because they did get Jalen Green last year. I might want to err on the side of Paolo's upside a bit more if they didn't already have a guy like Jalen that should be the top scorer on a contender, a very good shot creator, and eventually a playmaker, assuming that develops, and clearly he has the talent for it too. Then it makes you a little more comfortable with a high floor guy like Jabari sliding in behind him. And then, of course, we'll see what happens in 2023. Maybe the Rockets get lucky with Victor and Scoot Henderson, one of those guys at the top of the draft a year from now. They're also going to have all this cap space, and Houston historically is a lucrative destination for free agents. So the way I sort of look at it, Paolo has the upside of, like, if you want to squint hard enough, you can say Jalen Green, Paolo Banchero. If it all works out, these can be the two top players on a championship team. Can you say the same for Jalen and Jabari? Maybe, but I don't know if Jabari quite has the same upside, at least at this stage. But the bottom line is it's about building a team. It's about a puzzle. And with Jabari, especially his versatility, you have so many other options as you build out your roster. There's also the fact that he makes life a lot easier for Kevin Porter Jr. and Alperen Şengün to get their touches. And maybe by life being easier for them, I do think KPJ and Şengün will like playing with Jabari more than they would have with Paolo. Maybe one of those guys takes the next step as far as being a scorer or a creator. And then, of course, you have to wait and see what happens, as we mentioned, with your high pick in 2023 or your cap space a year from now or beyond that. The bottom line is Jabari gives you a lot of options. I think with the Paolo thing, you squint hard enough, you can say, hey, if Paolo and Jalen totally max out their gifts, then maybe this can be like the perfect Shaq and Kobe type duo to lead a championship team. But again, that's really wishful thinking. And, Rockets fans did a little bit of that. Well, guess what? That's what the lead up to the draft is about. That's what makes sense. That's what fans do. And especially if you're at pick number 3, you're not doing a compare and contrast with the top 3 guys because you're not, in all likelihood, going to be in position to make a choice. You're going to have to pick whoever's left. And so you're going to talk about who all the experts have as being available at 3, which was Paolo. So that's sort of my intro to all of this discussion. I don't know why people are saying, oh, now you guys are flipping to Jabari. No, you guys are just learning new information and adapting to it. That's part of being fans. That's part of following a team. You adapt, and the scenarios don't always go as you expect. And the good news is that this is still a pretty damn good one.
Yeah. Let me just say something real quick, Dan, before you take it away, and then you can transition into the next point as well. I at least personally, I said since the beginning that, yes, I prefer Paolo, right? But there's good arguments for the other ones. And I remember arguing with Clutch fans over this a bunch. And I would always say, you made the perfect example against Paolo, because if you don't believe he has the tools or he will achieve his ceiling, then Jabari is probably the right pick. I personally believe that Paolo has the tools to reach his ceiling. And so that's why I have him ahead, because I bank on him hitting that 90% outcome at the very least, right? But then I always say, like, once one of them is a Rocket, then we're not talking draft anymore. I'm supporting the player that's a part of the Houston Rockets.
Yeah.
Just like I didn't give a damn about Daniel Theis when he was on the Celtics, but when he signed for the Rockets, I was rooting for him to do well as well. This is not a foreign concept, and it was always expected. And then to have a little bit of an objective discussion, it is true. And the argument for Jabari, or at least I bought in so much on Paolo that I had to convince myself again to be bought in on Jabari. The easiest argument for me is you've got Jalen Green, right? And you do need more than one offensive option that can create their own shot. But the reality is the Rockets have 3 years to rebuild through the draft. And the one thing you can't do is you can't miss, right? You've got 3 shots at it, right? And I think Jabari is the one that pretty much guaranteed to not be a miss. He might not be as big as an upside swing, but it's also a draft that's generally considered to be worse than next year's. And the Rockets are projected to be a bad team next year. So maybe it makes more sense to, in next year's draft that has like a top 10 of players that project to be offensive options, your Wembanyama, Scoot Andersons, the Rick Whiteheads, both the Thompson twins, your Nick Smiths, for example. You've got all of these guys that you're likely going to get one. And so it also makes sense to have a guy like Jabari. And even if this scenario doesn't pan out, a team with $80 million in cap space, right?
Yep.
And the assets that the Rockets do will likely at some point be able to swing for a star via one way or the other. And the beautiful thing about Jabari is the defense and the shooting is something that's always valuable, whatever role they're playing. And his versatility defensively makes it so you can add a star or an offensive star that usually those come with some defensive deficiencies, you can add one at the center position. You can add one at the power forward and slide Jabari to the 3. You can add one that's a small forward and slide Jabari to the 4. You can add another shooting guard and he and one of them can play the 3. Jabari can cover for a little bit of the size deficiency at the 4 as well. You can add a point guard, but that actually kind of works would work with Paulo anyway. But the skill sets are there, and it makes team building a lot more versatile. And to me, the biggest deal of them all is team has a really short time to rebuild, and you've got to capitalize on the assets that you do have. And in a draft that's projected to not be great, it makes all the sense in the world. And it's very good because it wasn't the Rockets' choice, but it's very good to get a guy that you can't guarantee anything, but with pretty good confidence that will be able to play a role in your eventual championship team because his skill set is exactly what you want. And even if he doesn't hit any type of star value, his skill set alone is scalable to whatever outcome you want. If he can become a star, right? He can become one of the best role players in the league. He can become just a normal role player, but when you have the shooting and the defense, you can slot into any of these roles for a team and you'll always be successful.
And I agree with you completely as far as 2023, the draft, free agency, the added options he gives you in team building, and the cherry on top of the sundae for me, because he is an easier drop-in replacement right now as far as starting power forward for the Rockets. As I mentioned earlier, it is a better fit for Kevin Porter Jr. and Alperen Şengün, in my opinion, and maybe one of those guys ends up taking a leap next season or the year after that maybe they wouldn't have if it was Paolo, because the fit isn't quite there. And then that way, you fill that need for extra creation, scoring, whatever it may be internally as well. So you have the other avenues, and then the fact is, I think he's a better fit for your existing talent as well. And so do you need more? Probably. I don't know that you just say Jalen and Jabari, hands down, you do nothing else. That's going to be the two that are going to, Shaq and Kobe. Probably not. But again, you don't have to. There are so many other ways that this can happen. And that's why I think Jabari, you hit the nail on the head. You have a short window in terms of the assets, especially within your control. You need to make sure you don't miss. I think it's pretty clear right now they didn't miss with Jalen Green. And I think the odds are as good as they can possibly be that you're not going to miss with Jabari Smith.
Yeah, I think we took a pretty good care making sure that when we were doing most of our draft content that, we were praising Paolo. We really didn't tear down Jabari. So, do I feel bad switching over to Jabari after we drafted him? No, I really don't, because I didn't, make it a point in any of my draft coverage to really tear him down. He was second on my board behind Paolo. So, getting my second guy, that's completely fine. And that goes right with my best player available at the time. The one thing I do want to touch on that Ben pointed out, the Stanford KP tweet, right, about how Jabari looked so much better when Kessler was off the floor. I had a tweet with just a little side-by-side screenshot of Jabari on the left, I guess a little bit offset to the left of the top of the key, and he got the ball swung to him, and he took about 2 dribbles into the paint, and within those 2 dribbles, the entire LSU defense had collapsed on him, and they're just completely ignoring Kessler, who's spacing out. They're completely ignoring the guards behind him, and I think that just it was a very good depiction of what I saw a lot on tape as I've gone back. And when you watch some of these games and you're not looking for that specifically, you're just kind of watching Jabari for skills and things like that, shooting and things like that. It doesn't stand out as much. And we had an Auburn guy on our space that we did 2 days ago or yesterday, and we asked him, what did you see about a couple of different things from Jabari, and that was one of the things he pointed out was there. No one considered Kessler a threat to space the floor. When he was in the paint, his defender was just clogging Jabari. And I think if the Rockets have increased spacing, that's going to help. And I think, just not having to drive through help defense is going to help a lot, because I think the dialogue with the dribble has gotten a little bit misconstrued as well. It's not that he can't, bounce the ball off the floor and have it come back and hit him in the hand again, right? The problem is he doesn't have a bunch of creation moves and counters to beat help defense. And if he's not going up against the level of help defense that he was last year at Auburn, that becomes less of an issue kind of intrinsically. And I think some of the finishing at the rim stuff kind of coincided with that as well, because a lot of times when you'd watch on tape, he's getting blocked or something like that. It's the help defense guy coming over and getting him, while that primary defender is kind of holding him back.
And by the way, a quick addition to your point as far as his stiffness a little bit off the dribble and what he can do in terms of creating space. I think just as Jabari is a good fit for the Rockets, I think in that regard, the Rockets are a good fit for Jabari because unlike Orlando, where there isn't really an alpha creator, you know that Jalen Green is going to be that guy, assuming health in Houston. And we've seen Kevin Porter Jr. and even Alperen Şengün do it in stretches. So it's going to be much easier from day one for Jabari to play to his strengths as far as the shooting, the floor spacing, the defense, and gradually build on his weaknesses, getting a little more loose in his upper body and finding ways to create space when he does dribble so that he can get that shot off. And I think it's much easier to do that when you aren't developing bad habits. I think what happens so many times with these guys that are asked to do too much too soon when they're rookies, they develop bad habits. It can affect their confidence. And then even if it goes into year 2, year 3, and the team changes, all of a sudden, it can become a thing. Whereas in Houston, the way the roster is constructed, it's not that Houston overall is a way better team than Orlando, but at least from the standpoint of Jabari's perceived weaknesses when it comes to shot creation, they are, in my opinion, and project to be even more so, assuming Jalen continues to take that leap. Jalen Green, that is, not Jalen Suggs, because that's where there's a huge gap between the two Jalens. And so, that's where, to me, Houston fits well for him, too, is that he can gradually work on those weaknesses. And then who knows, by year 2, year 3, all of a sudden he may have improved that stuff to where we look back at the scouting reports and say, man, he just didn't really have a chance to do that when he was younger.
Yeah, and I mentioned this in a conversation I was having with Trey Klein, a friend of the show. The problem wasn't watching Jabari on tape and stuff like that. The problem wasn't that he couldn't make these amazing contested looks, right? The problem was he wasn't getting a lot of easy looks, and a lot of times, when you think of Jalen, right? So many times you see Jalen just create so much space that he's just getting an easy layup or an easy three, and that's really what stood out more so than he couldn't hit those tough shots, because he absolutely could. So what you want is the Rockets system, the Rockets spacing, the Rockets guards are getting him those easy shots, and so that way he's not having to take these tough contested shots all the time.
And the other thing too that Paolo pointed out on Twitter, one of the beat writers mentioned or asked the question to Jabari's dad during the press conference or after the press conference when we got to talk to his parents, his agent, that kind of stuff. And, Jabari being the youngest, he literally just turned 19 a few weeks ago. His dad left open the possibility that he could still grow another inch or two to where, if he becomes a legit 7-footer, then my God, it's like KD, even if you're not that slick necessarily, if you're that tall and can shoot that well, you don't have to have much separation just to rise and fire over someone. So that's a possibility as well that, not that his dad has any sort of inside intel. Obviously, that's just,
he has all of the inside intel.
Well, he does. I just mean in terms of whether he actually is going to grow. That's just one of those things that, if it happens, it happens. But no, it's a very valid point. And he did mention, of course, that there's some history in the family of doing it as well. So if that happens, then that makes it all the easier. If you're 7 feet and can shoot like that, you don't necessarily have to have that much wiggle in terms of your upper body to create that much room.
Yeah. And the other thing that I wanted to touch on before we move on is it's not like when people say that we flip-flopped or whatever, it's not like we were flip-flopping and we were just saying that the weaknesses that we thought Jabari had aren't weaknesses anymore. No, it was just that, at least I personally, I was highlighting the strengths and why he might be, I mentioned it being a blessing in disguise. It might be that he is a blessing in disguise, and it's because of his strengths. And this doesn't mean that I don't still think that he has something that he needs to develop on. He does need to develop, at the very least, like Don said, the ability to make the extra pass when he's attacking a kick out or when he's driving to the rim, right? Because having Kessler there, right, it still gives you a lob threat, but you've got to learn to use it. And with Şengün there, he's going to have to learn to use it as well. And most likely, throughout his NBA career, he's going to play with a non-floor spacing big, right? And while it's encouraging to see the numbers without Kessler on the floor, because I do think that there's something there to Jabari being a small ball 5 at certain points in his career, just because, well, every NBA team does it, and he has the size and the defensive skills to do it. It's also that he will need to be able to hit the man or dump it off to the man on the dunker spot or kick it out to the corner shooter or send it back out to the wing on the other side, depending on who's helping. but these are things that are not, when your expectation is that he probably won't be a ball dominating forward. These are things that he can focus on and he can develop. And when you're already so polished at the other two things, then you can focus more on this part of the playmaking, because we're not asking him to be running the offense. It's not that hard, and we've seen it with I mean, basically all of the star wings in the league came in not being good passers. Jason Tatum has learned it on the fly. Kawhi Leonard, the same thing. Paul George, the same thing. Like these guys, these really elite defensive and including wings, they learn this stuff throughout their careers. And even if he doesn't
even
learn,
Jalen made strides last year as a passer.
So these are things that he can develop, and they are still there. Like he didn't become all of a sudden a flawless prospect. It's just I was making an effort to highlight his strengths and why he might be the right option at the end of the day.
And again, it's going to be so much easier in Houston for him to potentially develop those weaknesses because he's not going to be asked to do too much too soon. And the context is what gets lost, especially on social media. Quite frankly, a lot of our analysis over the past month in terms of doing draft boards, we've been looking at Jabari through the lens of primarily Orlando, but worst case, Oklahoma City. And in those situations, I do think it's worse for him because there's not really that guy, especially not Orlando. Now in OKC, you could certainly point to SGA, but it remains to be seen exactly how long he's there for. But especially Orlando, those weaknesses might be a bigger deal because, again, it gets back to, developing the wrong habits and being asked to do too much too soon. But in Houston, especially when you look at that fit, you can see a scenario where he can gradually build on those. And then 3 or 4 years from now, we say, wow, that's not a deficiency at all. Again, it's just sort of to put a bow on it and to get back to what we led off saying, we just didn't discuss that angle because nobody, not just us, no one in the NBA mock draft community had any scenario where Jabari was available to Houston at 3. Now, I guess you can say there were some scenarios where we talked about, well, could Houston trade up to 1? But yeah, that's different because you're talking about mortgaging future assets for that. Nobody had a 1-for-1 scenario, Paolo or Jabari for Houston, so we didn't go that much into it. Now we know we're going into it.
When Woj gets it wrong, you're not expected to get it right. Like literally, Woj got it wrong until an hour before the draft. Like nobody knew.
Yeah.
Well, Vegas did, but other than that,
Woj got the Kyrie thing wrong too, so it's not looking good for him right about now. But I think this is a good time to come to a stopping point here. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about Tyty Washington and about John Wall. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. And continuing our second segment here on the Launchpad podcast, we're going to be talking about a pair of Kentucky guards, and we're going to start out with John Wall. We'll say Rockets legend John Wall, no longer with the team, still with us in spirits, I'm sure. Everyone enjoyed his time here very much.
Rockets press conference legend John Wall.
There we go.
He wanted to be there. He wanted to be there. He gave us some humor in some dark times.
Or the GDC, what we must mention, he mentioned his favorite quote was, "This shit's ass."
Terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We needed John Wall last season to get through it. Fans, media, we all needed John Wall content. Or 2 seasons ago, I should say.
So, Ben, let's go to you first. A lot of people saw this coming from a long ways away, but the day is finally here. What did you think about the number that Wall gave back? What did you think about how quickly he percolated over there to the Clippers? And what did you think of just John Wall? His time in Houston generally.
No issues with him picking the Clippers quickly. Again, he's been looking at this for a year. And I actually remember back during the 2021 playoffs, he actually went to a Clippers Western Conference Finals game when they were going up against who did they go up against that year? Oh yeah, Phoenix. That's right. And he sat with Paul George's parents. And that was one thing that sort of raised my eyebrows. I was like, to sit with another guy's parents, that's interesting. But it seemed like there was something there for a while. I'm happy for him. The number 6.5-7 million makes about sense because I believe that's the taxpayer MLE, and most of these guys, they'll give back exactly what they're going to make in their next contract. So it's about what was to be expected financially. I have no issues with it. Some people will undoubtedly say, well, if you're going to release him this early, why not buy him out a year ago? I think there's a couple of things. First off, you don't want to set the precedent of buying out a guy with 2 years left in his contract, even if financially it's the same thing, because they did pay him his contract last year. I do think that buying guys out that early, all of a sudden you can set a tricky precedent when it comes to a guy later on that might want out prematurely. I think it makes sense to wait until 1 year. And also you can explore your options. Look, I think there might have been a world in which if a hypothetical star had come available over the past year that the Rockets had pounced on, then maybe you could trade John Wall at the draft and get something. But the bottom line is, because the Rockets, for various reasons, did not make that sort of big impact trade over the past year, then keeping that 2023 flexibility is all the more important. And it's almost impossible to get $47 million in matching salary for John Wall. You would have had to have taken back longer term money, and it's just not worth it. A buyout is better than taking back longer term money. This is not like the Christian Wood trade, where because Christian Wood was making $14 million, you can easily accept 4 guys from the Mavs who are all expiring, and then it doesn't impact your cap. No, with Wall, unless it was a Russell Westbrook, and I'll explain that in a second, unless it was that, you're pretty much not going to be able to match salary-wise without taking back long-term money. And people will say, well, why didn't you then just buy him out earlier? Well, again, it's A, the precedent, and B, you don't know. If you had struck a big deal over the last year, then maybe flexibility wouldn't be that important, and then you could take back some longer-term money. But the fact is, the big deal did not materialize. The Rockets are still punting that back to 2023, which makes sense for a lot of reasons. We've talked about it ad nauseum on this podcast. And because of that, now is not the time to take back longer-term money, and a buyout is what makes the most sense. The only option that was reasonable was Westbrook and the Lakers. But if the Lakers weren't willing to give a first-round asset, and according to all reports, that was the case, the bottom line is that under Rafael Stone, the Rockets have clearly placed a priority on having good relationships around the league with players and especially agents, because when the Rockets do have up to $80 million in salary cap room or flexibility next summer, then hey, you want to make sure that agents are putting in a good word for you with their clients around the league, or that players around the league are telling, when John Wall goes to the Clippers, hey, the Rockets treated me right. And all of a sudden, maybe that plants a seed with somebody else on that team that's going to be a free agent or maybe a trade candidate, whatever it may be. The value in that, especially with John Wall, because he's repped by Rich Paul and Clutch Sports, the most powerful agency in the game, that is worth more than a second-round pick. Apologies to David Weiner, Beam Thug, second-round pick guy. Sorry, I will take goodwill with Rich Paul over 1 or even 2 second-round picks. Now, if it's a first-round asset, okay, maybe that's a little bit different. You can get a swap or an unprotected future pick from the Lakers, who could certainly bottom out in a few years. Okay, then I would trade him. But if that's not on the table, and apparently it wasn't, then to me, a buyout and the good vibes with John Wall, looking at it, to where everybody can smile about it, and make no mistake about it. I think John Wall clearly preferred the Clippers to the Lakers, and it's not hard to understand why. The Lakers were a joke last year. The Clippers, assuming Kawhi and Paul George are healthy, now you add John Wall. That's a very interesting team that, if healthy, can make a serious run and perhaps contend for a title next year. So I understand what John is thinking, and just wish him the best. And like I said, the fit didn't work once the Rockets pivoted to a full-fledged rebuild, but I'll always look back on him, and it's not fair to say that he was a disappointment, because it's not that he disappointed. The situation just changed. When the deal was made, I do think that John Wall was a better fit than Russell Westbrook with James Harden. And when that deal got to the finish line in very early December of 2020, you still had hopes of making it work with James Harden. And I do think there's things you could do with Wall and Harden that you couldn't do with Russell Westbrook and Harden. That clearly was not going to work. I think the chance of Wall was worth it, especially because you got a first-round pick with Wall. I think Wall was a better fit than Russ, and you got a first-round pick. And by the way, the first-round pick that you got from Washington, along with John Wall for Westbrook, was one of the 2 first-round picks that you sent for Alperen Şengün, who people are very excited about, and justifiably so. So, worst-case scenario, taking on Wall ended up leading you to Şengün. But I also, I think he played hard last year. I think clearly he played hard 2 seasons ago. Last year, he was around the team a decent bit, but he certainly didn't have to be. There's a lot of veterans who would have just totally checked out and not even tried to give guidance or be on the practice court with their younger teammates. There's nothing to be angry about. The situation just changed from when they traded for him in early December 2020. And even if, I know there's some that will joke and, throw out the tank commander memes. I guess you can say that. But again, I don't really, blame him for the so-called tank in the 2020-2021 season. Although at this point, not blame, it led you to Jalen Green. So credit, I think the downturn in his efficiency is one of those things. That team had zero creators. So whoever was the lead guy, in this case it was John, was inevitably going to do some stupid things because he was just being asked to do way, way too much, especially the stretch when Christian Wood was not on the floor. And then when he came back, but was a shell of himself because of the ankle injury. Whoever was going to be overextended, in this case, it was inevitably going to be John, was just put in a rough spot. So I don't seriously think that he's, a tank commander guy like Avery Bradley. No, I think John was a good player. He'll be a good fit with the Clippers. Wish him the best. And from the Rockets standpoint, good vibes with Rich Paul and Clutch Sports. Way better than anything you could reasonably get, especially considering the salary constraints, unless the Lakers are going to put a first-round asset on the table. They didn't, so this is the next best thing. And, of course, you do it now. The bottom line, this is what gives you the vibes. By doing it now, you let Wall pick his next team. If you didn't do it now, the Clippers might sign somebody else in free agency, and then all of a sudden, Wall doesn't have his primary choice. So you do it now, you make a clean break, you retain your flexibility next year, and hopefully the good word from John Wall and Rich Paul has some benefits for you down the line.
Yeah, and the other thing that I'll say, just to shout out John Wall before we move on, is, to me, the biggest thing was him being willing to sit for an entire season. Him being willing to sit for an entire season, to me, was the biggest thing, because it allowed us to see KPJ as a point guard. It allowed us to see KPJ and Dylan. And I don't know how many guys would have been just okay with not playing for a full season after being out for 1.5 years, and even the season before out for a large portion of the end of the season as well. So to me, the fact that he didn't make a big media buzz about it was a big thing. And it allowed the Rockets to not buy him out. And I think the main reason they didn't buy him out is because for the draft time and up until they bought him out, he was basically the biggest human traded player exception ever, because he was expiring money, right? It's whatever team, if we were trading for a starter or whatever it was, he would have been the salary match. And if we bought him out earlier, he would have been just dead cap, and you can't move that. So I think a good counterexample to what Wall did is there were reports when we were trading for Westbrook, or not, when the Westbrook for Wall swap was in play, that Russ would not settle for a buyout. Like, he didn't want to be bought out. He wanted to still be seen as a max player. He didn't want to sign somewhere else for the minimum or whatever, because that hurts your market possibilities in the future. I remember reading about that. And there's no way Russell Westbrook allows you not to play him for a full year. He's too competitive. He would have demanded to play, and you would have had to play him because he doesn't want to buy out. So you either waive him or you play him, and that could have been the situation with Wall. But he was a really good trooper. I'll call him for that.
Yeah. By the way, one little tidbit I think I can share now, because it's several months old now. In that brief stretch in November where the Rockets started 1-16, the awful Wood-Tice lineups, and there was the brief sort of 2-week period in which Wall was quote unquote ramping up, that everyone on Twitter still loves to joke about to this day. And of course, we know what ended up happening. He was open to coming back and wanted to help the team, but he didn't want to come back in a 15 minutes per game role, a DJ Augustine role off the bench. And the Rockets were committed to the Kevin Porter Jr. path, as we talked about. I do think KPJ got better this past season, and so it worked out for everybody. But John, he's a competitor. He wanted to potentially play, and so there were the 2 weeks that they looked at it and tried to see if there might be a role, if either side might eventually budge off their position. It didn't happen. Rockets were committed to the rebuild, and so it is what it is. Now he has his freedom. But back in those 2 weeks of uncertainty, when he was ramping up but not playing, and we all sort of in the back of our minds were like, is this really going to work? Because clearly he wants a bigger role than what the Rockets at this point in their rebuild were willing to give. They wanted to give the DJ Augustine, Dennis Schroeder role rather than full-fledged starting minutes. And he was going off the practice court one day. He was shooting around before a game. So the main court, excuse me. And Mark Berman chased him down because, Mark Berman will chase down anybody. And I followed. At this point, I did not have a relationship with John. One of the big drawbacks for NBA media the last couple of years is that because we weren't in locker rooms, it's hard to create like a one-on-one relationship with a guy. And so I didn't have a relationship with John, so I let Mark do the talking. But Mark chased him down and was trying to do anything to get a quote about what the hell was going on. And John said, trust me, I want to talk, but they've asked me not to say anything, and I'm going to respect that. And he did. And he basically, other than maybe a couple of very vague Instagram stories from time to time that were quickly deleted, He pretty much said nothing to the media all year. He could have made a fuss. He could have made this ugly. And I saw Berman, not that Berman's trying to do anything bad. I'm not saying anything bad about Mark at all. No, that's what a good journalist does. He's trying to get a story. But, I can see it from the journalist side, and I can also see it from the team side. And John Wall clearly wanted to talk. He told Berman, hey, I want to talk. But he bit his tongue and said, you know what, the team's asked me not to. And of course, Rafael Stone has said that time after time, that he's got a great relationship with John. He thinks the world of him. And clearly, John could have made this, as Paolo said, a lot messier than it was. He didn't. And so because of that, I think you have to respect him.
That just makes me wonder if when he gets to LA, how he's going to handle questions about his time on the Rockets.
I doubt anybody will even ask that much, though, truth be told.
I doubt they will, but it'll be interesting to see if it comes up. And, I don't have any speculation on which direction he goes. Just with your little, anecdote there, like, he'll probably just, be very respectful and just say, hey, that's how we handle the situation. But I think it would be interesting and something to watch for.
The introductory press conference. Yeah. I just think it was such a small blip on the radar. I think it would have been a bigger deal if, when the plan was initially announced last summer, there had been discord. But I think the fact that it happened like during the season, like he briefly, tried to come back and then it didn't happen. I just don't think, because it's during the season, there's so many other storylines. I don't think that nationally it really registered on the radar all that much. So we'll see, but knock on wood, my guess is that at least with the LA media, it doesn't come up. Now, who knows if Jonathan Fagan or Mark Berman is on the call, you never know. But my guess is that it didn't make enough of a ripple nationally to be a big deal.
We'll see if Chris Mannix is there, because you never know.
Oh, God.
But let's move on to Tyty Washington now. Paulo, you wanted to cover Washington first. I did a little bit more watching of Washington's game today, so I think this is a good time to talk about him a little bit more and get Ben's thoughts on Tyty as well.
Paolo, you're muted.
Yeah.
There we go.
Here we go.
So to me, Tyty, he's first of all, for 29, he's an absolute steal. He on a lot of very popular scouts boards. He was a lottery. We knew from, I think, Sam Vecini that the Rockets were the two prospects they were considering at 17 when the pick was on the clock was Tyrese and Tyty Washington. So teams always say this, but you know how much they valued him, and I think it's for good reason, right? Because we're talking about a 6'3", almost 6'4" point guard with a plus wingspan, I think 6'8" or 6'9" wingspan, that plays great defense, that before his injury was shooting 41% from three, which is elite, that has the free throw percentage to back it up, and that has clear floor general capabilities, both at the way he sees the floor, the way he executes passes, the way he masks passes to make them look like something else. And he has a killer mid-range game. What is he lacking, right? He's lacking downhill pressure. Getting by his guy, getting to the rim is definitely something that he struggles with. He is acrobatic, and he has some acrobatic finishes at the rim, right? He has the wiggle, I'll call it that, but he's not the best athlete, right? He's not Daishan Nix, but he's somewhere in between, right? And I don't expect him quite to become a guy like Westbrook or Harden that really thrives off of dribble penetration and kicking out to whatever shooters or thumping it off to the guy in the dunker spot. I think there are, and I put out a thread on this earlier today. Let me pull that up. I think that there are a lot of outcomes that you can get out of Tyty Washington that turn into very productive NBA players. And it comes back to the same reason with Jabari, that he's a really good defender. He hustles on that side of the ball, and he's a good shooter, although he got hurt. And then there's a clear difference. So up until, I think, 2/3 of the season, before he got injured, he was shooting 41% from three on decent volume. And then from there on out, he was shooting 27% ever since he came back from injury, right? And so that makes you think that there's probably something there, and hopefully the Rockets can get him right. But with the characteristics that I just brought up, I think there's three potential outcomes. I think there's the starting off-ball 3-and-D guard. A good comp for this would be your Kenny Smith when he was with the Rockets, your Patrick Beverley, who he was also with the Rockets, but a guy that's going to play really good defense, and that's going to be able to space the floor, who is playing with two guys that are more heliocentric, right? But will be able to, when he gets the ball, not only just catch and shoot or catch and attack a kick out, attack a closeout, but also be able to make the next pass if that's what's needed. To have those connector skills, right? I think this is pretty easy. Like I think this is the lower end outcome, right? And I think this is still a very useful player for a contender, especially a team with so many assets, getting poised to bring in another star, and usually those are also ball dominant. And then besides that, I think the like more of the middle outcome that has similarities to the outcome I mentioned before, but probably plays a different role on a team, is a world where he gets a little bit better at getting downhill, getting to the rim. He becomes more of a six-man role, someone who can play the role I said before, but he has more quality, right? And then so you'd want him to have the ball in a sense more often. And so you saw him in that six-man. He probably closest with the starting lineup as well, but he plays mostly with the second unit guys. That way he has more chances to have the ball in his hands, set up his teammates, be a little bit more of a ball dominant guy. My comps for him in this regard were Marcus Smart, back when Kemba Walker was there as well, someone who is a little bit more ball dominant, and we've seen it with the Celtics now where they don't have a point guard, and so Marcus Smart does a lot of the bringing the ball up the floor. And the other one was Ricky Rubio, right? I think all the players that I've listed so far are all really useful players, and this is why I like Tyty Washington so much, is because his game is easily translatable and just like Jabari, easily scalable to different levels. My third, my absolute ceilings category, right? And this will probably sound a little bit ridiculous because I'm going to mention guys that are all-time greats. But I was chatting with a friend of mine from Reddit that is a little bit more of a long-time NBA fan, and I was asking him, listen, tell me a guy that plays great defense, right? Is not the best of athletes, so doesn't get downhill a lot. Feasts in the mid range if he is an offensive option, but can also be a really good catch and shoot shooter from the outside when he doesn't have the ball. And he gave me two names, funnily enough, two Pistons guys. He gave me Joe Dumars and he gave me Chauncey Billups. And I went and watched a little bit of these guys, and I'm like, if Tyson Washington hits close to his ceiling, right? His bread and butter when self-creating will be the mid-range, and I think that was the same thing for those guys. But then when he doesn't have the ball in his hands, he's going to space out back out to the perimeter, and while the other stars on the team are doing their thing, he's going to be able to catch and shoot at a high clip. And then, I mean, the reputation that these guys have defensively precedes them. And it's hard to compare a rookie and say that he'll turn into those guys, but the attitude is there, and he clearly has a chip on his shoulder on the defensive end. He clearly has the hustle, and he has the tools, right? As I said, almost 6'4", I think it's 6'3" and 3/4, and then wingspan 6'8". Some places have 6'9", some places have 6'8". So those were kind of my range of outcomes. And what I like about him is it's not a boom or bust guy, right? But he still has a little bit of that ceiling. He's still 20 years old.
You know, when I watch his game, you know, someone who I think of, given like the traits you named off and what I see, maybe like an oversized Mike Conley. I think that's more conservative than
he's quicker.
You know, Joe
I think Conley's quicker. That was my
I think Conley is quicker, but you know, you're getting more size with
yes.
Tyty, and you're losing a little bit of that quickness and a little bit of shiftiness. I do like his mid range. I think his shot release is so quick that he's going to be able to get that off in the mid range, and then on catch and shoots as well. He has the floater. Like the in between game is just it's all there for him. There's really no part of his in between game that, you know, he seems to be lacking. I like his touch around the rim. I think, you know, scoring over NBA bigs may be a problem, but he's not someone who's just going to, you know, smoke a bunch of easily makeable layups. In my opinion, I think his touch is that good. The shot, like we mentioned, the shot between the injury and before, you know, it stopped going in after the injury, but you know, everything mechanically wise looked good with the shot. He looks confident taking it. He looks confident taking it even from like NBA range in some of the clips I've watched. As a passer, I still need to do a little bit more digging on him as a passer, but like I said, defensively, I think he's going to be able to be there and compete. I could see him struggling because he's not super quick with some faster guards. So if you put him on like a Ish Smith or something like that, I think, you know, he may struggle. Or if you know, if he had to guard Jalen hypothetically, right, I could see him struggling to guard someone like Jalen. But yeah, just overall getting this guy at 29, I think there's a lot of good things there. And I think instinctually he looks like he processes things fast. He looks like he uses screens well. And I think, I think he's going to be someone that's very fundamentally sound.
And to your point on quickness versus the super shifty guards, I think this is something where potentially he could be a good fit with Josh Christopher, because Christopher's someone who isn't really a one on offense. They want him to play off the ball when possible on that end of the court. But defensively, Josh is super shifty and is the kind of guy who
Yeah.
can pick up guys at the point of attack. So if Tyty isn't quite quick enough laterally to be like a true one defensively, at least like a Pat Beverly type to throw out a comp, then, he and Josh might be a pretty good fit together. And, as far as his game, I mean, I think you guys hit the main points. The one thing that I would add, just in terms of how he fits, just as we let off the podcast talking about Jabari being, a can't miss, and the fact that you can count on him, worst case, for 30 solid minutes a night on a contender is important. After Jalen Green, there's so much uncertainty in the backcourt. I know that you want to believe in Kevin Porter Jr., Josh Christopher, Dacian Nix. None of those guys is a sure thing. With KPJ, you add in the contract uncertainty as well. And I'm not going to say they won't extend him this offseason, but the odds are you wait until he's a restricted free agent for the obvious reason, the risk associated with him, some of the off-court, and then the cap flexibility as well. And so you add in the business dynamics, the fact that, look, Dacian Nix was undrafted for a reason. Now I hope they figured out the fitness issues, and if so, he would have been drafted, but there is risk there. Josh Christopher, good rookie year, but nothing that you would say, wow, he's 100% going to be the guy. All of these guys you feel pretty good about, but we could say that Jabari 90% plus is going to be a starter. Here's the thing, these other guys, let's say that we're 70% confident on each of these guys. Well, all of a sudden, if you add in, if you have 30% chances and you add them together, it's a lot more than 30% that one of those isn't going to work out. And so that's where Tyty Washington really has a lot of value to this team. I know a lot of people didn't look at guard as a big need going into this offseason, but if you feel pretty good about his talent, then yes, it does give you a nice insurance policy in case one of those other three non-Jalen guards, for whatever reason, doesn't work out.
And I just think the talent at 29 is
that too. The value is tremendous. Yeah,
you can't pass up on it. And even if they may have to do some roster finagling, you can't pass up on that type of value. And especially because they were able to trade back even from 26, pick up 2 second round picks, which will make Beema Thug happy, and then get Tyty Washington still at 29. It was just an incredible asset play by Stone.
Yeah, and just down to your joke, I mean, they got 2 second round picks and a TPE, so Beema Thug loved that trade.
Yeah.
But the other thing I was going to bring up is the thing about Tyty is he's the thing about his higher end comps being so much of older generation of players is because, well, usually when you're as good of a 3-point shooter as Chauncey Billups was or as Joe Dumars was, because they were volume 3-point shooters like for their time. If you take one of those guys and put them in this era, they're going to be pulling up from 3 a lot, right? That's good. That's going to be the main way they leverage their game, right? And if they're drafted highly and the team's trying to make them into a star, right? I think that's why they're really unique comps for Tyty. And then on the defensive end, I'm comfortable. I think I'm comfortable with Tyty defending ones. I think his problem isn't really lateral quickness; it's beating his man off the dribble. I don't know if it's a handle thing or if it's usually guys you can tell very early on if they're going to.
Oh, you're done. Sorry.
Wait, what happened?
I
was
7-0.
I was keeping up with it.
7-0. Wow.
By the way, he drove in Pena, who I don't know if you saw, your boy Jeremy Pena, routine ground ball to third, and somehow like Usain Bolt type speed, he beat it out. Pretty nuts.
Let's go. Because
Okay.
I was while we were talking, I was keeping up with the thing, and I saw that he had like 5, he had like 1 ball and had 2 strikes, but he had fouled like 3 or 4 balls in a row, and I was like, and then I saw second ball, third ball, and I'm like, I bet this is totally a spot where Jordan hits a homer because it's so unexpected. It seems like kind of out of sorts or whatever. Coming back to the Tyty thing, I think he'll be able to defend. I think he'll be able to defend Woods. I think he's really unique in that sense of it's just a unique set of skills to have the size, to have the defensive motor, to have the shot already, and then to have those for general capabilities. He was a highly touted prospect coming in, and then he dropped off a little bit. He was the man at Kentucky, right? That Kentucky team didn't have great talent other than him. And I know it's Kentucky, so there's some history in there. They're always going to be decent, but he was the man there.
Yep.
Or the best prospect, even though he was played at shooting guard at times for some reason. But yeah, what I really like about him is how scalable he is and how any one of these outcomes is a really useful player. And I remember loving Dylan Terry because Dylan Terry was very much the 3-and-D point guard. And the thing is, and even though Tyty has less size, I think Tyty is further along that scale of development. And if the Rockets look at him kind of the same way they saw Christopher and they thought, hey, what if we can turn this guy into a Drew Holiday type?
Mhm.
I think if they had that vision for him, I think it's possible that they have the vision for Tyty of what if we're not swinging on upside here, but we're swinging on a guy that really has all the tools to be one of the most useful and unique type of role players in the league. That's why I love him, and it's another guy that will fit into whatever scheme they bring on as a 6-man, as a starting guard with 2 stars next to him. I think he'll be great.
And I just want to highlight one more thing before we move on here. But, I think his handle is very, very good too. It seems like you just rarely have seen him just totally lose the ball, like
But is it
running
steady,
back
or
his
is it
trips and stuff like
what I
that.
mean is,
He
so you've
doesn't
got
have
Kyrie.
like a flashy handle. He doesn't have like that Kyrie real flashy handle.
Exactly.
He seems like he has a very fundamentally sound handle.
Exactly. He's
And
not
the
going to
ball
turn
just
it over,
right
but he's
on his
also not going
hand.
to.
Yeah. And
He's
his
not going to turn it
turnover,
over.
we talked about that last time. His assist to turnover ratio was like 4 to
Yeah.
1, which is just an incredible assist to
So
turnover ratio.
Yeah.
he's the type of guy that's not going to turn it over, but he's also not like nasty Kyrie Irving going to get by you with his handle, right? It's a really trustworthy kind of handle, a really
Yeah.
solid handle. He's not. I think it once again fits into the mold of a guy that's going to play a really important role, but not exactly be a star.
Cool. So we're going to go to break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about Eric Gordon. So don't go anywhere. We will be right back. And coming to our last segment here on the Launchpad podcast, we're going to talk a little bit about Eric Gordon and a little bit about free agency, which is coming up on Thursday. So I'm sure no one wants to, no one's going to want to, tune out for that. It's going to be one of the biggest days of the year for NBA news for sure.
Not necessarily the Rockets, but for the NBA.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rockets prioritizing 2023.
Yeah, as a watcher of the NBA for sure. But let's start with Eric Gordon. Ben, Gordon, he was here since James Harden was here. I think last offseason, people wanted him moved. When the deadline hit, people wanted him moved. And, none of it, of course, because Gordon's a bad player, but just because, we've gone to the youth movement. He has an injury history. People wanted to see him in a competitive situation, in the twilight of his career and, see him go for a ring, which, he's not going to be able to do because the Rockets are on, the rebuilding timeline here.
Hey, don't give up. Maybe in 2025.
Maybe 2025. But yeah, so what are your thoughts on Gordon? Do you think they move him?
Yeah.
Do you think they hold on to him? Do you think, something ends up getting done at the deadline instead?
Look, I'll make this quick. I don't know what's going to happen with him. I mean, clearly they do have him available. Windhorst reported last week, Suns and Sixers. Sixers beat writer said that the Sixers had interest, and it's just a matter of will they meet the Rockets' price. It's pretty clear that just a late first-round pick, especially a very late one like what they got for Christian Wood, is not enough. I don't know if a team is going to be desperate enough. Maybe the Suns after, just the embarrassment in Game 7, and they don't seem to have any major deals. In fact, they might lose DeAndre Ayton, so maybe that pushes them to do something because their window is definitely open forever with Chris Paul's age. So you can't write it off. But the bottom line is, if he stays, I just want to make clear, we can argue about the merits all day. We have in the past. There's no reason to go through it again. But if he stays, he's going to play assuming health and when he's in the lineup. He's not going to be in the lineup every day. We saw the Rockets last year. They're going to manage him, try to avoid back-to-backs, yada, yada, and that may help the quote-unquote tank too. But when he plays, he's going to start. He's going to play about 30 minutes per game. The bottom line is, if he's the type of guy that you're just going to make a backup and play 20 minutes per game, you would 100% deal him for a late first-round pick. They've had multiple windows to do that. They did it at the deadline, passed on that type of offer. They did it again at the draft. It's pretty clear there's interest in Eric Gordon. It's not that teams don't see him. It's that the Rockets have a price. That price has yet to be met. And at 33 years old, if the Rockets in a rebuild are going to hold on to a guy like that, with, a late first-round pick, it's not a great asset, but it's certainly not terrible. You're not going to do that just to play a damn guy 20 minutes per night or 15 and just have him as a rah-rah guy in the clubhouse. You've got Boban for that now. You've got other guys that you can do in that role. if you keep Eric Gordon, it's because you value his play, not just off the court, but on it as well. And I've underscored it this past year. You throw out that 1-16 start. I know people that are used to listening on podcasts know exactly what I'm going to say, but throw out the 1-16 Wood Tice just spacing clunker start where the Rockets were not even remotely running a functional offense. The last 65 games, when Eric Gordon played, they were 18-25. That's a 34-plus win pace. We didn't play, they were 1-21, which is like a win pace of less than 4 games. So clearly, he does things that helps the team win, and specifically the things that he does on the court with his floor spacing. Shout out to Jackson with the 4-point line. I know that's something that's huge that they believe in, not because it's worth 4 points, but they see that 4-point line being extra important for spacing for Jalen and KPJ. So Eric Gordon's willingness to take those shots and his ability to make some of them, also his defense, the versatility that he provides you on that end. He does things on the court that actually do help. Unlike Christian Wood, unlike John Wall, the Eric Gordon situation is different. On the court, he does things that helps guys like Jalen Green, like KPJ, like hypothetically Jabari Smith develop in the right way. And I'm not saying that you have to 100% agree with that. Reasonable people can disagree. And I know there are some that say, look, just play the young guys. Even if there are these advantages, just give the minutes strictly to young guys and sink or swim. That's a valid take. Even if I don't fully agree, I understand that. That's not what I'm here to do because we've argued that ad nauseum. All I'm trying to say with this is just strictly in terms of probability. If Eric Gordon is on this roster and the Rockets are turning down late future first-round picks for him, do not slide him into your projected depth chart as the 15 minutes per game backup shooting guard. No, if the Rockets are passing up those types of offers because they are not meeting his valuation, then when he is available, he is going to start. Now, with that said, he's going to get rest games from time to time. We saw that last year. That may preserve the tank. That can also make Jayshawn Tate a quasi-starter. And by the way, Jayshawn Tate, you can make an argument that Jabari Smith is a better fit with Jayshawn than Paolo would have been because it makes Jayshawn's lack of shooting slightly less of a deficiency. So in that sense, you could still have Tate as sort of a quasi-starter. He'd be your main sixth man anyway and probably get mid to upper 20s in minutes. And then when Gordon gets his maintenance games, then he slides into the starting lineup. But the bottom line, if Eric Gordon is on this roster, if he isn't dealt, then at least when he's healthy and available, expect him to play 30-plus minutes because it just, quite frankly, does not make sense for the Rockets not to trade him if they're only going to play him 15 minutes a night.
All right, Paulo, do you want to comment on Gordon, or should we let that be the final word on Gordon before we go into the trade deadline? Or the side
free agency, like trade deadline. Whoa!
I fast forwarded too far into free agency.
I'll just say one thing. I think I wonder how real the Sixers' interest was, because to me there's two scenarios here. It could be just Daryl Morey doing the Rockets a solid and leaking interest but not actually doing the trade, or just saying, oh, like it's from a Sixers report that it's coming out that the Sixers are willing to give pick 23. Like maybe that's leverage for the Rockets. We've seen them experiment a little bit with playing with the media and rumors like that with all the Oladipo trade.
I'd believe it more if it was just that, but the fact that it was Windhorse 2, that makes me think there's something more to it. Now, granted, are they still interested after getting DeAnthony Melton? I don't know. That's a fair question. But yeah, I do think there were some legs this time.
There's a way. So I don't know if they.
By the way, Ollie Khan reported, Rockets insider Ollie Khan reported that he said there was legs to it from the Houston side too. So you're right about them doing it like with the Oladipo 2021. This case, I actually do think it was real.
Okay, and then the other thing is, it still works after the Melton trade, right? If the Sixers, there's an argument that it's pick 23, right? But when you drive the pick out of the parking lot, the usual,
new car,
it loses value, right? And if the Sixers were waiting on something, whether it's the PJ Tucker deal or if how much of a pay cut Harden takes to bring him on, there's a scenario where, Melton was the best value they could get for pick 23, and they still believe that maybe Melton and Thibault can get them a first somewhere else. And so I don't know if the trade's confirmed yet, but they can still they can't aggregate Melton with Korkmaz anymore, for example. But they can, if they haven't concluded the trade, they can still trade Melton again as long as it's by himself. So I think it's not completely dead in the water, but with the PJ Tucker thing, and it would have been a hard cap scenario, so Harden would have had to take a pay cut, and Gordon himself is more salary than what the Sixers could. Like the Sixers would increase $2 or $3 million salary in a Gordon trade. It's definitely tougher. The one I'm looking out for is the Suns because, as you said, I don't think they would do a trade at the draft. The Suns would because they don't know what's going to happen with DeAndre Ayton. But once that's settled, um, if they end up not paying Aiden or they trade him for a couple more pieces, I think there's a real scenario where Gordon does go there and they have all of their picks available. And if he goes, man, I mean, Eric
Yeah.
Gordon's ever since I've been a Rockets fan, Eric Gordon's probably the closest one besides Harden he would be the closest one to having his jersey retired that I've watched play for the team, right?
All right, so we're going to transition a little bit here into free agent centers. The Rockets have expressed interest. I can't remember who did the reporting on it. I apologize, but they had expressed interest. Maybe it was Fagan actually, but they've expressed interest in potentially bringing in a backup center in free agency.
Yeah, Fagan did. Yep.
Some of the name. Thank you, Ben. Some of the names that we heard, circled around: Nick Claxton, Mitchell Robinson, Mo Bamba, and then I think Fagan had mentioned maybe even someone like JaVale McGee as well on that podcast that he did.
Yeah. Scotto mentioned Robin Lopez on my podcast, so that could be another one.
Yeah, I do recall that. I ran a little poll earlier today. Just 3 names that I heard people were kind of high on that are a little bit younger. So I ran Mo Bamba, Nick Claxton, and Mitchell Robinson. And with 50% of the poll, Mo Bamba, Texas, University of Texas alumni. He
and that
won
38%
that poll, so.
3 last year, I think.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting.
I think it would be fun just from a narrative standpoint to poach Mo Bamba from the Magic and then say, oh, look how much better the Rockets development team is. We got Mo Bamba in here and became, a great player. So I am now hitched my wagon completely to Mo Bamba. I'm hoping that's what they do. Paulo, we'll go to you first. Who do you want if they do go backup center in free agency?
So, first of all, the Mo Bamba thing. I think with Paulo there, it makes even more sense to bring back Mo Bamba because he does both. He is the rim running type of center that Mark Williams was for Paulo. He can also space the floor if they want to run Paulo in an ISO and get him downhill. That being said, I mean, for the Rockets, I think the biggest problem with Mo Bamba has always been mentality issues because he doesn't hustle. He didn't develop to he's pick 7. Right, he was supposed to be this type of floor spacing, like 7-footer, or I don't know if he's 7 foot, but you know what I'm talking about. And it didn't pan out. And I think a part
freaky wingspan.
Freaky wingspan, yeah. The whole 9 yards with the Magic scouting. But in my opinion, and I guess I'll defer a little bit from Ben, is in my opinion, unless you're trying to create an asset out of the MLE this season, kind of what they tried to do with Daniel Theis and the TPE they had last season. If you're trying to do that, sure. If you're successful at it, if that's the case, then I would consider Mitchell Robinson. I would consider Nick Claxton, right? If you can get them for those values, I think they have a little bit of upside still. And I think there will be assets that you can move on or that they can play a role in your team like when you're trying to contend. Other than that, if you're actually just trying to get a backup center, if the best options are off the table and you're left to wander between your Robin Lopez and your there's no more names that don't come to mind immediately.
JaVale McGee.
I would go to Bruno Fernando and I would offer him the same deal we offered Garrison Matthews. It's a low risk, high reward deal. He played well when he was here. He has the same tools that you'd want out of a
he has a different skill set than Şengün. Yeah.
He has a different skill set from Şengün. He's more of that Nerlens Noel type, although Noel is obviously a higher end outcome of that. He was already on the team, so you already know what you have. And he provides flexibility. And the other thing is, he is someone that if it doesn't work out, you can easily just sit him on the bench and play Garuba there. And this is my biggest thing. In 80% of the scenarios, I would rather just play Garuba at the 5 and see what we have there.
Yeah.
And bringing Bruno Fernando gives you both. If Garuba is completely not right, you can send him back down to the league and you can play Bruno as the backup 5 we saw him play. He's clearly not amazing, but he's also not completely outclassed when he's on the floor.
Yeah,
right?
He's functional.
And exactly. And he's low risk, high reward. So those are, if you can't get Mitchell Robinson from the Knicks, Mo Bamba from the Magic, or Nick Claxton, I would just go Bruno Fernando and start Garuba to start the season and see what you got.
Yeah, you sold me on that. That's a pretty good plan. Because Bruno is the type of guy at his age that has a lot of upside. If what is really the difference between Bruno and JaVale McGee, other than JaVale does have a little bit more
How
lane.
much they're paid?
Yeah, well, I know, but in this case, the Rockets are bargain basement shopping. No, you can get a lot of the same skills, but a little bit younger, more upside, and probably less unhappiness if they end up not playing and going into the Tice role from a year ago. But yeah, what I would say as far as the upper tier, I doubt it works out because all these guys, we're talking about like Claxton and most likely Bamba. These guys are, my guess is they end up restricted, and they're the type of age in which, especially, in the Magic's case, they're rebuilding. In the Nets case, boy, any asset they let get away is risky because that thing is so close to teetering on the brink. My guess is that the MLE probably isn't enough, even the non-taxpayer MLE, that they end up staying. And so I could see the Rockets, sniffing around, and if one of those guys is okay using Houston to sign an offer sheet, and in that case maybe they stay, or more likely, in my opinion, the other team matches, then fine, because ultimately, like, if you pivot back, a guy like Bruno Fernando is still going to be there a week from now into free agency. I'm fine with them taking the bigger swing, though, not a huge swing, but like in NT MLE territory, like Paolo was saying, you can use that guy as an asset, because in terms of that $80 million in cap space, we need to be clear. 2023 is not shaping up to be like a 2010 Miami Heat, LeBron James, and Chris Bosh type scenario. The odds are, with that 80 million, you're going to be, if not all of it, at least some of it, using it on projects, either a literal project from the standpoint of seeing if they develop in your system the way you want that guy to, or B, maybe it's like taking on a bad contract like a Duncan Robinson and getting draft capital, renting out your cap space that way, and then you have that draft capital to help you out in trades down the line, or maybe you keep it and draft those players yourself, whatever it may be. The point is, it's not like every cent of that $75 to $80 million in cap space is going to be used on clear difference makers who come in September 2023 and all of a sudden are just gangbusters. No, you're going to be doing some creative things with that space. So if you can get a guy like a Claxton or a Bamba, someone this summer for a reasonable contract. David Weiner was pointing this out, B-Mythog on Twitter today. If you can do it at a reasonable rate, and the odds are those guys will probably have decent trade value, certainly not super negative at their age and with that skill set, then just like with Tice last year, there's no harm in trying that. It's very minimal downside because, again, I just don't see giving up $10 million in theoretical space, not even actual space, theoretical, because who knows? These guys could easily be moved again at the deadline the same way the Rockets did with Tice this past year. It's just really, it's not much downside. If you can get one of those guys, then sure, I could see the Rockets taking a swing. But my guess is that realistically, most of those guys, even if they are open to leaving and those teams aren't going to match, the Rockets aren't really at the forefront of the list anyway, because let's be real, the Rockets had the worst record in the NBA last year. They also, everybody knows the Rockets are going to prioritize minutes for Şengün as much as possible. Now, maybe Şengün can't play that much because of foul trouble. We'll have to wait and see. But the bottom line is Şengün is going to be higher in the priority list, the pecking order, if you will. So I don't know if it'll work out. But does it make sense for the Rockets to try? Yes. So I'll say they take a swing on, a Claxton or Mo Bamba, someone in that tier if they're available, and not immediately re-signing where they are. But more than likely, it's someone in the Robin Lopez, JaVale McGee, or I think Paolo's talked me into it. I'm good with Bruno Fernando for that role.
Yeah,
I want to do one hypothetical, kind of something that Ben brought up there and something that I tweeted out earlier today. I mentioned, giving Nick Claxton a large offer sheet as a way of making the Nets pay up to try to increase their potential repeater tax
bill. Yeah. Smart.
So, what are y'all's thoughts on that?
A quick little bit on that. So
yeah.
What you've got to realize is the Nets don't have the Rockets MLE, right? And so what they can offer to Claxton is the league average for the position. I'm pretty sure that's what it is, with his early bird rights, which projects to be about the same as what the MLA is. So you've got to be careful to offer. Like, the thing about Claxton is that's basically his market value, and you can't really offer more than that, because then you can run into a situation where the Nets really can't match. It's impossible. Like, one of the things that people forget is, for restricted free agents, it's possible for the team to be unable to match because they don't have the means to.
Oh, yeah,
like,
good point.
if they're hard capped, or if their MLE is the tax MLE and you're offering them the normal MLE. The other thing is, what I would look for, even if it's, you can probably can't do this with a Mo Bamba or a Mitchell Robinson or a Nick Claxton, but if you're going to settle for one of the lesser guys, I would put a heavy premium on having the contract be descendant. And the other thing is, try and get, with Dice, you've got the team option at the end. Try and get the third year non-guaranteed or partially guaranteed. Like, try and play as much as you can with the guarantees. Make yourself as flexible as possible, and that will help you if you need to trade them away. Having a partial guarantee doesn't always mean that you're going to waive the guy, but it's also a security insurance, an insurance policy. When you're trading the guy, the team that's taking him, if the team that's taking him on, will have a little bit more security as well. So I would toy around with that a lot.
Ben, any follow-up thoughts on that, or we good to
No,
wrap?
I mean, I think we covered it. No, I think that's cool. You want to be as creative as you can, again, because it's hard to see these guys as really like the long-term center. So at least to some degree, they're an asset. Maybe they can help you short-term, but it's primarily an asset. So yeah, I try to get them to sign the most, friendly deal you can. If you can get a partial guarantee in one of those latter years, that's all the better, because at least partially, those guys should be looked at as assets. So yeah, do all you can to make that contract as trade-friendly as possible.
Cool. I think that's a good place to stop. I'm sure everyone is looking forward to free agency, which will be tomorrow when most of you hear this. So definitely look out for all of our content following free agency, and what the Rockets plan to do in the early days of it. So that's gonna do it for us tonight. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Don Knock. You can follow Paulo over there at Paulo Alves NBA. Ben, tell the people where they can find your stuff.
Yep, Ben DuBose on Twitter, the Rockets Wire on Twitter, rocketswire.usatoday.com, and search for the Logger Line at your podcast distributor of choice.
Perfect. So that's going to do it for us. Until next time, y'all, be safe and go Rockets.